Goldman Sachs to move hundreds of its staff out of London.
And this is just one example. At the time we're making this video, 20 banks have already announced that they will move part of their staff out of the UK. The most optimistic estimations claim that the City of London might lose over 30,000 workers, and the most pessimistic argue that this could be as high as 200,000. But wait just a minute here. Why is this important? Well, if you've been following visual politics for a while, you already know that London is the global financial capital. More specifically, that global financial capital would be the City of London, also known as the Square Mile. The Square Mile is essentially a city inside of a city where most of the international banks have their headquarters. Yes, even after Brexit, it is possible that London will keep its sway on the markets in Asia and even America, but so far, European business accounts for 35% of the city's workload, and of course, leaving the European Union is going to have some consequences. Well, now you might be wondering, where are these banks going to go? Which city will be the new financial capital after London? Well, after months of competition, it does seem as if we do finally have a winner.
Banks and other companies plan expansion in Frankfurt after Brexit.
So far, it looks as if Frankfurt is going to become the new financial powerhouse in Europe and perhaps one of the most important in the entire world. But what does Frankfurt have that other cities like Madrid or Paris don't? Well, today we are going to answer this question, but before we do, let's have a look back at the history.
Why are banks leaving the city?
The City of London is an area of about a square mile, see where the name comes from, which is located inside broader London. They have their own laws, they have their own mayor, they even have their own police.
This little space is the home for the main international banks. 300,000 people work here. And of this 300,000, 60,000 are European immigrants who entered the country thanks to being part of the European Union.
And okay, my dear countrymen, I know what you're thinking. Despite being an EU country, the UK never was really inside the free circulation area. This means that, theoretically, the British government could have closed the borders to all those immigrants at any time they wanted. But, in practice, European citizens were getting in and out of the country as they pleased.
It's clear that EU migration to the UK has increased significantly over the last 2 decades. In 2015, there were just over 3 million people living in the UK who were born in other EU countries, an increase of about 1.9 million since 2003.
Nevertheless, they are going to change.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister.
The British Prime Minister, Conservative Theresa May, holds an extremely weak position. This is despite the fact that she won the general election in June, she just lost a large number of seats in Parliament doing that. In fact, it's not even clear if she's going to finish her term. And of course, people from in and out of her party, they are pushing her to increase immigration controls.
I've consistently said that the referendum vote was a vote for us to change that freedom of movement, was a vote for us to bring control into our immigration system for people coming from the European Union. There's a variety of ways in which that can be done.
This would have a big impact in the City of London. Indeed, a bigger impact than anywhere else in the UK. As we said in another video, part of London's success comes from their ability to attract talent from all over the world. But if the government closes its doors to foreigners, those banks who hire immigrants will have it significantly harder than before. And make no mistake, this is not only due to Brexit. In fact, the anti-immigrant sentiment in the UK, it's been going well beyond the borders of the European Union.
Theresa May to charge companies £2,000 per year for each non-European Union worker they employ.
But wait a minute, because there's still more. As I said, Theresa May and her Conservative Party have lost a good share of the seats in Parliament. And, well, where did those seats go? Well, they went to the Labour Party, a party whose leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has declared war on the banks. On his election manifesto, he already proposed things like this.
Labour calls for UK financial transaction tax.
Until now, this tax was one of the biggest advantages the UK had over the EU. As you might know, Brussels has been for years debating the possibility of having a financial transaction tax. This is something bankers really don't want, and no one really wants to pay. But if the UK's Parliament ends up passing such a law, a lot of companies will be wondering if they still want to keep their offices in London. In other words, even if the Brexit negotiations end up being great for the UK's interests, the air is still becoming more and more poisonous for the UK's financial industry. And this explains why so many banks are starting to think about opening offices outside of the UK. But now the question is, why are they choosing Frankfurt? Well, let's have a look at that.
Europe's financial capital?
On the very day after the Brexit referendum, the race to take over London as the global financial capital started. For example, in Spain, the regional government of Madrid launched their own advertising campaign designed to attract bankers. Even the finance minister, Luis de Guindos, held personal meetings with executives from JP Morgan and elsewhere to offer special tax conditions. In Paris, Emmanuel Macron had already announced lower taxes for banks in order to lure them from London. But I'm sorry guys, it's really hard to beat the allure of Frankfurt.
Standard Chartered plc, Nomura Holdings Inc., and Daiwa Securities Group Inc. have all picked Germany's financial capital for their EU base to ensure continued access to the single market.
If you want to stay wealthy, you should have at least a dependance in Frankfurt.
Citigroup Inc., Goldman Sachs Group, and Morgan Stanley are weighing a similar decision.
But what's so special about this city? Well, first of all, Frankfurt already has the headquarters of the European Central Bank, as well as other big banks like Deutsche Bank. This means that they already have the network effect we always mention here at Visual Politic. They have lots of other things like startups, law firms, consultancy, etc. Besides, Frankfurt has many business schools with international prestige, as well as a university and the second biggest airport in Europe.
We now have in Frankfurt like 400 Chinese companies. We have like 800 Turkish companies, 1,000 companies from the United States. Only the rate of the English companies is quite little, but this will change, from my point of view, automatically.
If this was not enough, 70% of the German population speak English fluently. This means those British banks can send their managers to Frankfurt, hold international meetings, and even hire locals without having to worry about language.
If you think this is not important, good luck trying to find the same setup in France, where only 39% of the population speaks Shakespeare's language. Not to mention Spain, where this percentage is lower than 25%.
But hold on a minute, because there is still more. As I said in a previous video, Germany is a decentralized country. This means regional governments and trade unions have way more autonomy here than they have in any other country. Thanks to this political architecture, the region of Hessen, where Frankfurt is located, can offer things like this.
German labor laws make it difficult to fire people. Frankfurt had initially proposed a change in labor laws that would either exempt bankers or high-income earners more generally from the rules.
Okay, but now let's think about something else. If you have a bank and you want to set up your offices somewhere, what is the first thing you will need? Well, that would be a building. You need a physical place where you can put your offices. Well, in this regard, Frankfurt is better suited than anywhere else. You see, after World War II, Frankfurt, it was totally destroyed, and they had to rebuild it almost from nothing. In other German cities, urban laws forbid the building of skyscrapers in order to maintain a uniform, more traditional skyline. But not in Frankfurt. Here, you can make buildings as high as you want. This explains why, despite a population of less than 1 million inhabitants, Frankfurt looks like a big metropolis. Further, Germany has one of the cheapest real estate markets in all of Europe. Despite the high salaries, houses, rents, and square meters are half the price of Paris and a fraction of the cost of London. Okay, but now I know what you're thinking. I mean, come on, Simon, what about corporate tax? Isn't this the most important thing of all? Well, yeah, I know. Germany has a corporate tax that in some cases reaches 30%. By comparison, the UK is at 20%. And you're absolutely right, but the devil here, it's really in the details. Do you remember how I said that Germany is highly decentralized? Well, this applies to corporate tax too. In this country, corporate tax, it's divided into two parts, a national and a regional one. This means that the federal government gets only 15% of the tax. The rest depends on the region. This means, technically, the state of Hessen, where Frankfurt is, really has the ability to reduce this tax a lot. And of course, doing this might lure more and more British bankers there. And finally, if none of this was enough for you, here comes the big finale, the financial transaction tax. This was the tax that we mentioned before that scares away so many bankers. That tax, at least in Europe, has about as many loopholes as possible. There are so many exceptions on this tax that even its biggest supporter, the German finance minister, had this to say.
Even a Swiss cheese needs more than holes. There has to be something in between them. Otherwise, it's just a hole, not a Swiss cheese. Wolfgang Schabel.